Seeking the truth never gets old, even when it hides in the shadows. Immerse yourself in the world of June's Journey, a free-to-play hidden object game set in the roaring 20s. Solve the mystery of the devious gossip spreader and celebrate our 7th anniversary with exclusive events, never-before-seen decorations, thrilling mysteries, and exciting giveaways. The adventure and the gossip awaits. Are you ready for the journey? Download June's Journey today for free on Android or iOS.
All right, so we're back with My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz with Ken Widener and Mike Lynch, and we have a special guest today, Michael Streed. And Michael had done some work on some of the photographs, or the photograph that everyone talks about in regards to whether or not John and Clarence made it out alive, and if they made it to Brazil. And so he had done some work for, I believe it was the History Channel show or the Discovery History Channel. And so we wanted to have him on. Ken and Mike have never met him, just kind of via email exchanges and stuff like that. So we wanted to have him on to kind of talk about what he does and how he, his process and how he, analyzes these photographs. And he also is a retired law enforcement officer as well. So he has a legal background for that. So Michael, thank you for being on with us. And so why don't you start off by kind of telling our listeners what it is that you do and how you do it?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to talk about what I do, and in this particular case, which, has fascinated, generations of true crime and Alcatraz buffs. But how I got into this was, my primary career was that of being a police officer. I started in the police department back in the late 70s, and I retired as a sergeant in 2008 from a police department in Central Orange County, California, near Disneyland. And throughout my career, I was a detective, a field training officer, worked a variety of different assignments, gangs, street detective, crimes against persons, worked on the homicide investigation team. And along the way, when I first started becoming a police officer, my first thought was basically my best way of serving my community and making sure it was safe was locking as many people up as possible, as long as, of course, they were the right people. So I was always looking for something that would be a good tool for me to use. And I was a lifelong artist. My original career goal was to be a Disney animator. I wanted to make movies and do cartoons and make people happy and put a smile on their face. And I guess in a way, I put smiles on people's faces who were the victims of crimes when we did the sketches and locked somebody up. But I didn't really know I wanted to do that. My father was a career police officer, retired after 35 years as a police chief. And I always had cops around my house and a police presence. And I listened to their stories. And police officers are they're either considered big BSers or great storytellers. And I just was amazed at the stories they would tell. Not so much of the heroics, because a lot of the people I was exposed to were pretty humble, but just the day-to-day interactions they had with people made it a less monotonous career than sitting behind a desk somewhere. I thought, I'm outside all day, I'm first there on the scene of the action, and it would never be boring. I mean, it was something that appealed to me. So I got into it after high school, put my art career on the shelf. And one night I was getting ready for work, and I saw a police composite sketch flash across the screen on ABC 7 Eyewitness News, which is based here in Los Angeles. And it was a composite sketch by LAPD's police sketch artist. And at that moment, I had that epiphany, is that aha moment where I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's how I can merge my art career, my love of public service. So I got on the phone the next day and started calling LAPD, got a hold of sketch artist. Coincidentally, he was having an upcoming training class. I took that training class. We became friends. He became a mentor and a good friend of mine, who I still keep in touch with to this day, over 40 years later. And it started to fire me. The more I learned, the less I knew, and the more I wanted to learn. So I traveled all over the country at that time, studying under the best people that I knew of in law enforcement. And I learned how to do facial reconstructions. I learned how to do different types of composites, some photo editing along the way. And it seemed like every time there was something new to learn about facial identification, I got into it. Went trained with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on how to do age progressions of long-term missing children. When it came part of things started going digital, I learned how to draw digitally and pencils and paper to pixels and screens and pen styluses. And there was just so much to learn in my journey. And every time, for example, I heard about this one-to-one facial comparison and analysis field that was out there, and I wanted to train in that. So I went to several training courses in that, because it seemed like if I would get a request from somebody and I couldn't do it, I'd figure out a way to do it. And all it did was expanded my repertoire of how I could both serve law enforcement. And as it turned out, serving private individuals in the entertainment industry. I'm a regular sketch artist, do a lot of props for Bosch, the television show. I've done that for like the last 3 seasons. I made an appearance on Lincoln Lawyer. So I get to do some fun stuff as well. And when I retired as a police officer, or police sergeant, I should say, I knew I didn't want to go. I still have a lot of life left in me and a lot to offer. So I started my own consultant business, and that grew to having a global presence. I was invited to Ghana in 2018 to speak about forensic art and forensic facial imaging at one of their forensic universities there. I've lectured all over the world via webinar, thanks to Zoom. And it's just been an amazing journey. So I have my own company now, Sketch Cop Solutions. We're a forensic facial identification consultancy firm. We've developed a composite sketching software for agencies that don't have access to a qualified police sketch artist. We offer training, consultancy, again, to both the public sector through law enforcement and the private industry, collectors, the entertainment industry, private investigators, people who don't feel like they're being serviced properly by the police department. If they don't have a resource or they want a sketch done, then they hire me sometimes, working in concert with the police department that's investigating their case to make sure they have all the resources available. And most recently, as far as a career goes, in 2011, it sounds like a long time, it doesn't sound so recent, but it still seems fresh to me. I was selected by Baltimore Police Department to be their first ever full-time forensic sketch artist, which meant I left my family in California and did a boots on the ground assignment there in Baltimore, serving one of the most violent cities in America. And I had the highest caseload of any forensic artist in the country at that time. And I still serve them via Zoom remotely today, like most agencies I service. And it's just been a tremendous journey that I don't see any end to. And of course, what got me involved with Ken was the Escape from Alcatraz show that was broadcast in 2015 on the History Channel, when they presented this photograph to me to have me take a look at. And again, with all the training I'd recently finished in one-to-one photo analysis, it was a great first assignment to have. And it was a very, very interesting case that lives on today because they keep replaying. I keep getting Facebook messages on TV last night on the History Channel. Wow, people are fascinated by this case. I'm still fascinated by this case. What happened to these guys?
Exactly. Who wouldn't be? I wanted to stop you real quick. I just wanted to ask you, just kind of, because what you've kind of laid out there is you obviously started out in law enforcement and then you got into police sketch artists and stuff like that. So, and you've been doing it for a while. So I just wanted to ask you, what have you seen as far as the progression, as far as how you can identify these photos as when, or suspects and police sketcher? How far has it come since the time that you started, when you basically, went to that mentor of yours and took that class?
Back then, again, I've been doing this since 1980, so it's been coming up on 45 years. And in that 4 decades, a lot's happened. In particular, I think the two technologies that have impacted our field the most have been forensic genetic genealogy with DNA, and also CCTV cameras and the proliferation of cameras, people with their smartphones and such. So there's so much information available these days, and there's been such a lack of confidence by police investigators and prosecutors in eyewitness identification that police composites have kind of gone from like up here, one of the first things they call, to one of the last things they call, if they even call at all. And as much as they feel eyewitnesses get it wrong, most of them get it right. And it's like anything else. If you're trained properly, you're going to do the job better than most and minimize those opportunities for the wrongly convicted.
Absolutely. All right. So take us into how you got contacted to be on the History Channel show and what kind of work you did for them.
Okay, well, in 2015, I was contacted by Texas Crew Production, a company out of Austin, Texas, and they were doing a show for the History Channel on the escape from Alcatraz. Now, I don't, I think everybody in my generation probably heard of Alcatraz, and everyone has the same question: did they make it off the island? There's a movie made about it with Clint Eastwood, and it's been a part of American culture for so many decades that when they asked me to take a look at this photograph, I jumped at the chance. Again, it was a case that had a law enforcement angle to it, an investigative angle. And I liked the way they approached it because they just wanted me to look at the picture, see what I thought in terms of if it could be the Anglin brothers, and what my thoughts were on it, because it was an integral part of this series that they were filming.
So how did you break down that photograph, and how did you attack that photograph to kind of?
Well, it's really interesting. Yeah, the photograph itself was it was an older photograph. It was probably better than most of the photographs I get, because a lot of the photographs I get, if they're not law enforcement based, they're collector based, and they're tin types and they're older type of photography technology. This one being rather recent, there was still some clarity to it. There was some blurriness to it. There was some detail in the areas I needed it. But most of all, you had a couple of guys here wearing large sunglasses, some facial hair, some overgrown hair, which grew over the years, which is an important identifier when it comes to facial comparison. So my approach to it was to take a look at it, do some reading up on the brothers, try to learn a little bit about their background, because while I heard of the case, I didn't know a lot about the mechanics of players involved. The unique thing about this, now, it wasn't my job to determine the provenance of the photo or the validity of the photo, if it was a doctored photo. Mine was to basically look at the photo and try to identify the people in it. The one thing that I found, before going into the process, was that these brothers, while incarcerated, always seemed to get incarcerated in the same prison and always seemed to be together. So without that creating a bias, it did seem odd. People who are trying to refute the photo, what would the likelihood of these two guys showing up in the same picture, allegedly in Brazil? So when I look at these photos, I try to get photos that are in the same angle. And luckily, there were a lot of booking photos, some candid shots. I think one of the brothers, there was a photo taken on the steps outside the courthouse, so the facial angle was tilted in a fashion similar to the photograph in question. I had some technology where I was able to rotate the other. Now, I don't remember who's who, so I'll tell you the darker haired brother.
That was Clarence.
Would that be Clarence?
That would be
Clarence?
Clarence. Clarence.
Okay. So I was able to tilt his face and rotate his face similar to the one in the photo. And then after I had all those lined up and cropped to a similar size, then I went and did a top-down analysis of the face from the top of the head down to the chin. I looked at the cheekbones, if there was any detail left in the ear, because again, the ears are pretty much a pretty stable structure, like a fingerprint. It's going to stay very similar through time. And it has very unique traits that are identifiable. And I think that there was enough detail there in terms of the similarity in shapes. I think that so it just basically hopscotching around the face, looking at the facial features. It had enough detail for me to discern, make some sort of professional opinion. But at the same time, when you look at photographs, it's something that's very subjective. No two people are going to look at them and see the same thing. Whereas we may believe it's somebody else is going to come along and say, not. So in this case, I was able to determine that after my analysis, that it was my professional opinion, my belief that it was highly likely that picture depicted the Anglin brothers, and that in fact they were highly likely they survived the escape or still alive, or
Yeah.
were live at the time of the photo.
For some of the other photos you were using as comparison, how many did you actually use to kind of get you that sampling?
At least no more than 6. I would say 4 minimum, 6 maximum. There were a lot of pictures of them. I mean, again, they had they'd been arrested several times, and there were a couple newspaper photos, and so there were plenty of photos for me to make an objective, subjective evaluation and come to some sort of professional opinion.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, you were obviously there when you heard this information, correct?
Well, I wasn't in the room when Art and Michael were looking at photos. I believe Art is the one who was sitting with Michael when he was analyzing or giving his results when they filmed it. I actually didn't see the end result until pretty much everybody else did when the show aired. They kind of kept it from us. So.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about, since now I know how it was kind of set up, that you were set up with Art, the former U.S. Marshal. And was he retired at that point, or was he still in the Marshals? I can't remember, 2015.
Art, I think he was retired.
Yeah. I believe he was about to retire from the Homeland Security. He had moved over into Homeland Security, and I believe he was just on the verge of retiring from that position.
So, Mike, talk us through what that was like, and when obviously some of the stuff, I'm sure you guys had conversations off camera beforehand, and just kind of talk us through what it was like kind of going through that with Art, the retired U.S. Marshal.
Sure. Yeah, what had happened was I was submitted via email the pictures, and then I went ahead and created the display panels, and as well as filed a formal report on my findings and what I based my findings on. Then I returned that to Texas Crew, since they were the client, and then they had me. They arranged for my travel to Austin to film my segment alongside Art, and I went ahead and went through the whole process with him and showed him on screen what I was seeing and what led me to believe that it was highly likely that these were brothers. And off camera, I wouldn't say there was a lot of pressure, but there was some trying to get me to say that was for sure brothers. And I said, well, I don't think that this is one of the things I caution all clients, whether they're public or private collectors. I said, unless somebody jumps out of that photo and says, hey, it's me, or there's some sort of DNA or some sort of hard evidence that proves it's them, you can't look at a picture and say for sure it was them. Right. All I told them was, quite famously, if it were me, I'd round up the posse.
I love
that. Was as close. That was as close I would get them to say, if I was a detective, I'd round up the posse based upon what you just told me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they did.
So can I ask Michael a question?
Yeah, hope so.
So Michael, as a professional law enforcement that has done this before, if you were trying to identify two people in a photo and you're trying to see if this is the same person, is facial recognition pretty much the standard tool that you would use, or are there other tools that you could use to aid in that comparison?
Well, you could use a facial recognition software program of some sort. You'd have to enter your known photos, photos that have been verified and widely recognized to be that person, and then of course you'd have to put your question photo in there and let the algorithm do its work. Now, there are different algorithms on these different facial recognition software titles, and there are a lot of them out there. Some of them are based upon interpupillary distance. Some are based upon highlights and shadows and such. And so no two algorithms are going to rate them the same if they rate them at all, if they recognize the photos. Like, say, for example, you put a bunch of pictures of Clarence Anglin in there that's known to be Clarence, and you put a bunch of pictures of John in there that known to be him. Then you put the question one in there one program may rate it at 87%. One may do it at like 78. One other may do it at 92%. You can set the threshold at what you want these facial recognition systems to recognize a photo and makes the matches and such. I don't use that. I use a system that was taught by the FBI and another defense contractor, whose people look at these terrorists from drone shots and different intelligence sources. So I use this morphological method where I just take two photos and I look at each facial part and look at its form, look at its shape, keeping in mind the time they were taking, what aging does to the face, and make my determination from there.
So what you said, which I agree, is that you're using a software to do this. Is it possible for a law enforcement individual to take two photos, lay them on a desk, take a ruler, regular standard, ruler, and measure, say, the height of both people and determine whether or not that's the same person? Is that a valid way of doing it?
No, it's not, because you don't know what lens was used on that camera. You don't know the exposure, the angle, how far away the picture was taken. And while there is some software that has tools to compensate for that,
but you couldn't do it manually. I mean, it's almost kind of impossible. Like, for instance, I couldn't take a ruler and say measure. I've got two photos of Clarence, the one that was from 70s in Brazil, and one that I have that him standing up against a wall at a prison. I couldn't measure his elbow down to his wrist and then do the same thing on the other photo and say, well, it's not the same, so it can't be him. I mean, that wouldn't be a legit.
No, it wouldn't be, because you've got no sense of scale, right, and nothing to measure against. I mean, like it's like when you see a crime scene photo, you'll always see this thumb and forefinger holding a ruler in the lower corner in the screen, and because there has to be some sort of sense of scale, because otherwise, no two pictures taken the same, and you've got no scale, you've got no information on the camera, the aperture, or anything. So it's really a useless endeavor to try to do that, and it's not recommended, nor is it recognized.
Can you use characteristics? Let's say, like, for instance, in every photo that we have of Clarence, let's use Clarence for an example. Clarence always carried his cigarettes. He was a smoker, and he carried it in his pocket. If that photo that we're talking about, throw out the facial recognition, Clarence had, or this individual in this photo had cigarettes in the same pocket. Or let's say, like, there is the way he would hold his hand, like from his index to his thumb, was the exact same kind of way as he's just standing casual. I mean, can you use those type pieces to say, hey, well, this person looks very similar because has the same characteristics?
You can make that inference. I mean, okay. Look, with facial recognition, facial comparison, just like the same thing with stature and gait analysis, all it does is it gives you probable cause to, like in police, the law enforcement world, it gives you probable cause to do further investigation upon that person. Say, for example, there was a picture of somebody that you put out there, and he's a wanted fugitive, and he's going by a different name, and he holds a cigarette, he walks very similarly. Law enforcement is going to approach that as, okay, it could be him, it may not be him, but we're going to have to go maybe do some surveillance, maybe collect some DNA surreptitiously. It's again, because there's nothing in a photograph outside of somebody holding up their driver's license or something to prove it's them, to really say it's them. So it's really an investigative tool to give someone more cause. Like, for an example, with this case, all my analysis did was give the U.S. Marshals or whoever else a reason to go down to South America to look and investigate and see if, in fact, they could identify them, and if they were dead, identify their grave and exhume them and do DNA check and stuff like that.
Do you know if they ever went to Brazil? The U.S.
I don't know.
After you get it?
After I came home from Austin, that was the last I heard about the case in terms of what progress has been made or what's been done on the case. Other than through talking to you, that's it.
Okay, Mike. Hey, Mike Lynch, why don't you tell him a little bit about, because what I thought was really interesting, and it's kind of like the direction we're going to, the way John wore his watch and how we kind of analyzed it in two different photographs.
Yeah, there was a, a photograph of John taken some years before Alcatraz where he wore a watch on his left, not on his wrist, but more on his forearm, which is a little unusual. You know, most people, when they wear a watch, it's on their wrist area, of course. That's why they call it a wristwatch, not on the forearm. And then in the Brazil photo, this person standing is wearing a wristwatch on his left forearm, just as John did. And we have two photographs of the 75 photograph and the one that was taken some years earlier. And the wristwatch is essentially in the same location. I mean, it's not absolute proof, of course. I'm sure there are a lot of people who wear it that way, but it does intersect with the person in the photograph that they would wear it in that unusual manner.
And well, and again, if that's the case, then it would be up to the investigating law enforcement agency to determine if that was enough for them to do further investigation and commit the resources to. Because even though this is a case that's of interest to the public at large, and it's a cultural crime, so to speak. In other words, it's everyone's heard of it. So it's when they make movies about stuff and write books about things like this, it becomes a public interest, and it's still an open investigation, to my knowledge, is what it should be. So it all depends on how interested that law enforcement agency is in clearing the case and bringing some sort of resolution to it. So I think all those are good points. All those, as they pile up, you know, whether it's a facial analysis or an object that's very uncommon in the way a person would wear, whether it's facial jewelry or wristwatch on their forearm or however they do it, you present those findings to law enforcement, and it's going to be up to them to see how much resources, how interested they are in clearing this case.
Well, the thing that we have found interesting about the Brazilian photograph is, for both men standing there, is the way that they stood, the manner, like the wristwatch, you know, Clarence being more dark hair, John being more blondish, you know, the cigarettes in Clarence's pocket. And then, of course, you know, I know Clarence's face wasn't as open to interpretation because it's more covered than John's is. You know, his is always the stronger result. Even when we did the show with Expedition Unknown, when we had Ident TV, you know, do the same analysis you did with their technology, you know, their connection to John was much stronger than it was to Clarence. But all the markers that we can identify in the photograph when it comes to the two always intersect to John and Clarence. It's not an absolute identification. Like you said, you can't say that's John and Clarence. You can't say that, but you can say it's, as you said, it's highly likely because the markers are all pointing to them, rather than, oh, John wore his watch on his left wrist, but this guy has it on his right. So that's clearly a contradiction. There's nothing in the photographs that contradict known information about the two, which in my mind really makes a very compelling case that these are actually them. Because if Fred Breezy took a photograph of two other people in this photo, the odds of them matching John and Clarence so closely are, you know, next to zero. I would think that he either was trying to fake a photograph by using other people to forge the idea that it's them, or he just grabbed two guys and they just happen to be so closely aligned with John and Clarence that it seems more unlikely that it's not them than it is them.
And look, I get a lot of, again, crime pictures. I had a picture the other day somebody sent me of a fugitive, and I said, yeah, you know, it resembles the person, but there are a couple differences here, and largely was one of the clothing style and a hat that the person was wearing, that it was unlikely that person would, if you've got like 50 pictures of the guy and he's wearing a similar style of clothing, and all of a sudden you've got one picture of a person that resembles him, and you know, you go from outdoorsman to someone who looks like a skater. At that person's age he'd be now, I don't think it's very likely. Just like there was a picture somebody sent me of JFK, President John F. Kennedy, when he got off a plane in Dallas before he was assassinated. They had a picture of someone in a crowd who they thought might be an assassin. They sent me mugshots and other media photos and such. And while it may resemble them, there just wasn't enough there. I mean, sometimes it's a minute detail, or sometimes there's just something that's just out of place, but the rest of them resembles that person. And in this particular case, there was more going for it being them than there was not, regardless of how much the faces were covered with facial hair, overly large sunglasses, of course, which is the style back then. So I felt pretty confident.
So Michael, you looked at it in 2015, and we've had a couple of other companies look at it throughout, the last 5 years. The last company was, as Mike said, Ident TV, which was in 2022. Today's term, talking today, 2024, is the technology now almost, with the help of AI, is it at the point that we could probably, if we had it re-examined, what new tool is out there, and what do you think the chances of it even getting a closer match?
In my experience, what I know now, you're looking at technology that would lead you to them, and or if they passed away, where they're buried. And DNA or fingerprints or dental charts is the only thing that's going to give you a positive ID, because again, you're working with a photo. You're working with something very subjective. So AI might be able to enhance the photo. It might be able to provide you with an age progression, but the only thing that's going to lead you to them is good old-fashioned detective work. And once you find them, or you find their bodies, recognize positive ID analysis, again, DNA, x-rays, dental charts, things like that, fingerprints if there are any, then that's it.
Gotcha.
Hey, Michael, do you know if AI is at that point? Because I've seen some crazy things that AI has done with photographs and enhancements and stuff. Do you think that they have the capacity to actually take off the facial hair and de-age their skin based upon the shape of their head, and to kind of really be able to get underneath those layers, and also subtract like the sunglasses? Is that something that AI could possibly do to kind of enhance that photograph?
Possibly, and because AI is doing nothing than scraping the internet for images that they use as resources and a learning tool. It might find a picture of them on the net and replace their real eyes with that of the image with the sunglasses on. So I'm not quite sure how that would work. I've been using and introducing AI into some of my work now, because you just can't ignore it. Yeah. But you have to be really careful that you're not, creating something that's not there.
Well, I think the thing with AI, it's all about how it's prompted too.
It is.
And because we've used it on some projects as well, and so it'll only evaluate the information you give it. And it's like we could load in every photograph of Clarence and John into an AI program, and along with that photograph, and then ask it, all right, do these two people match up with the existing? Because what I find it's really interesting, and what is, because I've gone through, Ken and Mike have sent me all these photographs that they have in the book, and some that have not been in the book that they've written. And the one thing, after I started looking at them, then I started studying them. And then when we got to the point where we were really looking at that Brazil photograph, I started going back and looking at, they have a ton of pictures of those guys just standing next to each other. just standing casually in a contrapposto pose, we're just like kind of arms down, just and stuff like that. And there's so many similarities in their posture, their hand position, just the way they look at the camera. I mean, it's very, it's very provoking. And it's just like, and now that we, then Mike, like a few weeks back, pointed out when they were talking about the wristwatch, and I actually looked up photographs of people wearing their wristwatch that way. I couldn't find it. I had a hard time finding people, I mean, the only thing is like, and I don't know why he did it that way, other than I know they were farmers. They grew up in a family farming. And that to me would be like a logical thing to do, is to push because they work with their hands. They don't want their watch to get hurt or, destroyed. And so they push it up towards their forearm. And, because I was looking at all these photographs, and there was a lot of, just from the naked eye, and I'm not an expert at this, but just after you're looking at them long enough, and I've been looking at these photographs for a few months now, almost on a daily basis, because we put photographs into the podcast as well, and also going through the book. And, we're doing some other projects with Ken and Mike and trying to get their story out there. So I was just curious if that is something that you can really, and because I understand, being a filmmaker, I understand the concept of lenses can distort images. You have forced perspective. You have, like you said, if you don't have something that give you scale. And I found it really interesting that he had him pose in front of that anthill.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm like, that was like kind of a strange kind of pose. And it's like, and that anthill, I mean, I'm guessing, and Ken, you can probably tell me, I mean, they look like to be about at least 6 foot tall.
Well, I know that when Mike and I don't know if Michael knows this, but when we did the Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates in 2022, we went down to Brazil. We actually went and found the farm that photo was taken on. And we went out into the field, because Fred Breezy, the one who took it, described, the field and all these ant hills that were out there. And truly, there were thousands of them. But we came up on where we believe that photo was pretty much taken. And there were ant hills out there, Mike, what would you say? Maybe 3 foot tall, maybe anywhere between 3 and 4 feet tall. Some of them were actually taller than that, but I'd say the majority of them maybe between 3 and 4 feet tall.
Yeah.
And then
they're similarly shaped. They're sort of cone shaped, the way that
Mm-hmm.
they're designed by I think it's termites, not ants.
Oh, it's termites. You're right.
Yeah.
I say ants, but
yeah. So 3 feet tall. And how tall were your uncles?
Oh, try to. Now you're challenging me.
5'10", the other one was 5. I think Clarence was 5'10". I think John was 5'11". I think.
Yeah, Clarence was just a little bit taller.
Yeah, 5'10", 5'11". Yeah.
Yeah.
That's in the FBI report.
We have a passport photo that we think could potentially be John, right, Mike? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, there was the John Anglin photo that was taken in Brazil.
Right.
Yeah, that photo in that passport. But I'm curious, would you be able to do?
Oh,
I mean, it's such a small photograph. Ken, you know which one I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
It's very small, but I don't know. Would that inhibit your analysis because of the size of the photo, or would you be able to do something with
You
that?
just scale it up.
Yeah, I have to scale it up. And again, when you're talking about AI, there are programs up there where you can scale up a photo like that and not lose any detail or distortion. So it's something that could certainly be done. I'm really curious, though. I mean, keep talking about these photos, and is there still some doubt amongst law enforcement that because I understand?
I'll let Ken answer that question. We actually had Art on the podcast.
Yeah, so right after the show, when we were filming, and the very first time I ever showed that photo to Art, yeah, literally, it was. I mean, people will think, well, it was made up in the show, but it really was genuine. I handed him that photo, and I could see it in his eyes. His eyes just like went wild, and they took him off and talked to him, and he was like, his brain was spinning 90 miles an hour. He could see it. And so he pretty much really believed it. And when we went and we met with Michael Dykes, who was the acting U.S. Marshal on the case at the time, he thought, okay, yeah, I can see it. But then later on, he came out and tried to discredit the photo. And that's the reason why I asked you about measuring, because he came out and did a TV interview and said he looked at the photo and he compared it with another photo of Clarence, and he took a ruler and he measured their arm length, and it came up different. And so, in his opinion, that was not Clarence and John. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're not even a professionally trained person to look at a photo and you're discrediting it right now. Well, too long after that, Art then started kind of saying, well, we're not sure it's them, and there's no definite proof. And I'm like, well, of course. But then when we showed him, IDent TV, they came back with a 99.7% match with John. He still pretty much is standing by Michael Dykes and saying that they don't believe the photo was them. So, even Michael Dykes came back and said he thought that it was taken in Brazil. He won't discredit that, but he believed that that's one of the other Anglin brothers that were down there, and that's actually Uncle Man, is what he says.
Doesn't even
Which
look
I'm
like
like going, well, what in the heck would Uncle Man, my uncle, be down in Brazil? So every time he came and said something, it didn't even make sense.
And it doesn't even look like Uncle
But
Man.
also the lenses, I mean, we've been working with cameras for over 25 years. There's no way that you'd be able to take a ruler and make that distinction.
Well, that's the reason why
I mean,
want to
in a
hear
photo,
Michael,
that's ridiculous.
as a professional person, say that, because to me, it is ridiculous that he would come up and say that kind of stuff. And when I mentioned it to Art even told me, he said, yeah, you can do that. And I was like, no, Art, I don't think you can. He was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you can do that. I was like, no. So I'm just glad that you backed up what I've been trying to say.
If that's the case, they wouldn't have a measurement thing behind on the wall when they take mug shots.
Well, and I kept saying, today,
that's why they do it.
In today's technology, the FBI is not at an airport watching this terrorist walk through the door and they're measuring him versus doing facial recognition. That to me is the number one tool that, at least I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but that's the number one tool that law enforcement uses today to identify someone. Is that not true?
For airports and different types of secure facilities, facial biometrics is a big deal. But again, you look at it this way. This is one thing as a former law enforcement officer that I recognize that law enforcement is really loath and really difficult to change. It's like an aircraft carrier trying to make a U-turn in the middle of the ocean. It's a very slow, laborious process. And I understand why the FBI and the U.S. Marshals and whoever was involved back when the escape occurred, they had a dog in the fight because they were embarrassed. They didn't want, the whole idea, the whole reason they put a prison out on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, because it was supposed to be escape proof. And really, if you look at it, there are a lot of things people can do that people think they can't with determination, proper planning. And I think one of the things that Texas Crew Productions did very, very well was they presented the scenario based upon evidence that was found supporting that in fact they did make it off the island and they did survive the trip across the bay. But they did it in such a way that they presented it to where it was up to the viewer to make their own conclusion. And I'm really disappointed that law enforcement today, 60 some years later, agents and officers that don't have a reputation or a dog in the fight, even their own agencies, are still loath to admit what appears to be the truth that these guys made it off the island.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Now, well, there's a lot of things. I mean, it's like Ken has gotten a lot of the redacted files through FOIA requests, but there's plenty of others. And we were talking, we had a retired FBI agent on here, and even he said, he goes, at this point, why wouldn't you just release everything? I mean, they're either dead or they're in their 90s and nothing's going to happen to them anyway, or their families. This case is basically closed as far as that, but they continually say it's open because there's no resolution for it. And I just find it's very strange why they wouldn't want to know, or at least let people know what really happened, regardless if it was a mistake on the government's part and short-sightedness. I mean, there's so many things about, and I don't know, I'd be curious to, hear your version, hear what you feel after, if you've read their book yet. Their book is, because I thought I knew a lot about the Alcatraz escape, but what Ken and Mike have done is they put together really an amazing piece of work where they kind of break down, but they illustrate what type of men these Clarence and John were from an early age, coming from a family of 14, super poor, and they had to steal things just so they could have toys and food for the family, and that's what got them in trouble. But they were God-fearing kids, and every time they escaped from one of their reform schools or detention centers that were that they always went home because that's where they wanted to be. So they always found them. But they became escape artists at a very early age, and pretty much either escaped or attempted to escape every place that they were put into. And I think that, when you talk to law enforcement on the federal level, I think they don't want to acknowledge certain things. I mean, when we had Art on there and he said, do you want to change your opinion? And he says, he's pretty much no. He goes, I don't think they made it. And then he goes, and then we asked him, did you ever go down and look for them to Brazil? And he goes, well, we had Interpol. And then Ken has documents stating that from the government stating they believe that they're in Brazil. And it's just like, so it's like, I don't understand the disconnect between the two things, other than if they're just kind of signed this document when they become federal agents that they have to toe the line. But I just don't, it doesn't make sense, especially at this day and age. And the amount of data and evidence that both Ken and Mike have produced in this book. I mean, it's, like I said, we always said, we told Art, it goes, listen, we're going to get a jury, we'll get a judge, and, you can present your evidence, and all Ken and Michael have to do is just throw the book on at the jury, read the book, and we'll see how it lays out. And Art just got done reading the book, and we're hoping to have him on. So I'd love to hear his thoughts on that. But I just don't understand. I mean, from your perspective as a retired law enforcement, I just don't understand the resistance to data like that. I mean, it's like, how can you ignore it, other than you're just kind of towing a party line to kind of save face?
I think that, well, I mean, my personal opinion as a retired career law enforcement officer is basically, these people, and let me throw it out there that, the FBI, the U.S. Marshal's Office, they've done fine work over the years. They're very storied law enforcement agencies with a rich history, with a bunch of really, really good people working for them. And I would think that this would be an enormous public relations coup, if nothing else, to really bring this case to a close. But again, I had a boss in the police department one time, a lieutenant. He eventually became chief, and he told me one time, he said, look, we all answer to somebody. And having a father who's the chief of police, being in his office when he picked up the phone, one phone call moved heaven and earth. We all answer to somebody, and maybe the buck doesn't stop with the U.S. Marshal himself. Maybe it goes higher than that. I don't know. I'm not into conspiracy theories, but I can't understand why there's reluctance, because again, the case is so old. Wouldn't you want to get it off the books? Wouldn't you want to be known as the organization that really finally solved this thing, instead of making you guys go to create a GoFundMe account to hire a private investigator to finally crack the case and find the bodies, or find them in an old folks home in Brazil or something?
Yeah. I mean, it's like we have enough information to really kind of at least verify and go down there and hopefully possibly find a grave site. I don't know what that would look like in another country, being able to exhume a body to just do a DNA test. But
we could do a DNA test on their kids.
Yeah.
That too.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing. That's the other thing. We have like documents kind of basic. Cindy, lay out what we have as far as you've been doing.
We have like a lot of documents that are connecting Clarence and John to the children that they allegedly had. So there's a probate letter that was in that area by that farm given to one of the children in 2011. And his name is also Clarence. Not many people named Clarence in Brazil.
Yeah,
Not a lot.
I'll have to put the book on my to read list, but I look at this, and again, just what I saw on the Escape from Alcatraz History Channel program convinced me to take a look at it and say possibly. And look, I've met a bunch of people who were just street criminals who had no art, had no swagger to their game, so to speak. And then you read about these people like John and Clarence Anglin that pulled off an amazing escape. You see these. I saw a program, I think it was a Netflix show or something, about the Spider-Man of Europe or whatever. This guy was a rooftop burglar, former special forces guy, and he had this. There was an art to his way of stealing, and I didn't like the fact he stole. But I had to admire the guy's game and the precision and the discipline and all the work and thought he put into his planning. So as a professional, I had some respect for his game. Did he deserve to be in jail? Certainly. I'd love to sit down with the Anglin brothers whether they're 90 years old or whatever, and find out how the heck they did it. Who wouldn't want to know that?
Exactly.
Well, Ken's got a good line to that, in this book, which you'll see when you read it, is that, he was able to get a lot of information. He also, some of the information he got about his uncles was through Whitey Bulger, who he had corresponded with when Whitey was inside prison, when they were doing research for this book. So he's got tons of letters, and he basically told them a lot of details and how things were done. Because, based upon, and you'll find out when you read the book, is that it wasn't just John and Clarence that planned this escape. They had a lot of help. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it was their master plan, but they had people behind them that had an interest in seeing them getting out. And so, which takes it to a whole nother level when you have that. And the fact that, one of those people, notorious gangster Mickey Cohen, who they had a relationship prior to being locked up in Alcatraz, who was also locked up in Alcatraz with him, somehow was able to get paroled for 6 months by Chief Justice Warren, Supreme Court Justice at the time, which has never happened. We have Art on camera here saying that has never been done before, ever. So there's I'm not a big conspiracy theorist either. I mean, I'm about facts and stuff like that, but something's strange there. There's strange why that would happen only for 6 months. And then literally shortly thereafter, when he came back, because John and they were only in that place for like a year and a half, I think, before they escaped. So, an incredible amount of time, short period of time that they had to plan one of the most amazing escapes from a prison ever. So it's hard to believe. And I think that just that layer there about the Chief Justice Warren and the way the government was working at that time just leads me to believe there's more to this than meets the eye. And that's probably why, you have Art standing his ground, and a lot of other federal agents who have been experienced with that they just don't want this information out for some reason. In the same way they don't want the JFK information out. In the same way they're, dragging their heels on the Trump assassination attempt. And now it doesn't, the most storied law enforcement agencies in the world, they can't figure out how a 20-year-old kid got up on a roof and, took 8 shots at a presidential candidate. And everyone's like, oh, I don't know. It was the local law enforcement. It's their fault. And, we didn't have the proper radios. Oh, the roof was too, sloped. I mean, it just it doesn't, I was listening to a former CAI contractor, Navy SEAL, who has a podcast, and his name's Sean Ryan, and he's he's worked for the government his whole life. He's done like super high end, intelligence stuff. He did a lot of crazy stuff. And when you hear someone like that who's been inside these organizations where he says, I don't trust any of them. I don't trust what they say. I don't trust what they do. I can't, that's, that to me, that's not conspiracy. That's just someone who has an experience of seeing how the sausage is made on the inside, and that they just keep on passing the buck, keep it in a file, bury it somewhere so we don't have to deal with it. Because if no one's talking about it, we don't have to deal with it. And I think that's part of the thing. But for something like this, after all this time, I don't understand why, they just don't open the floodgates. Most of the people that are involved that were working at the prison are dead.
Yeah.
I think it's you see it every day, like at the local law enforcement level. You find out, like an officer that does something that, like he beats the daylights out of somebody and it's caught on camera and he's brutalizing somebody, and you find out that the person's been fired by 3 or 4 law enforcement agencies. It's like, how do you get hired? And when it's on camera for everyone to see, law enforcement agency circles their wagons and defends the person and doesn't want to come out and admit, we made a bad hire. We corrected the situation by firing this person. They're no longer employed and will never be employed again in law enforcement. But instead, they try to hide it. They turn their back on it. And the public's not stupid, and I don't believe in necessarily full transparency and accountability, because I don't know that everyone can really handle that. But I think they can. I think people know what they see. And I think with most people's value systems, they recognize when people are doing a poor job and need to be removed. And law enforcement agencies shouldn't stand up there in front of the cameras and defend or try to hide from the fact that it happened. They made a mistake. And I think the public would appreciate it if they admitted that they made a mistake and this is how we corrected it. No different than federal level. You know what? We were wrong. These guys did make it off the island. And guess what? We've solved the case. And, people would have so much appreciation for that.
Exactly.
That's all we're looking for. Yeah.
Well, hopefully it's
That's
coming
all the
in our
family
lifetime.
I agree.
I tell you, it's just a strange world. And, when I first started in law enforcement, we didn't have all these incredible tools. We didn't have drones. We didn't have facial recognition. I carried a radio the size of a brick. I had a few bullets on my gun and I carried a police baton, and that's it. And now you see the full-on raid vest with tasers, with this and that, and 100 different radios. And there's so much technology that it's a great time to be in law enforcement, but yet at the same time, we actually had to hide. We actually had to, we had less tools, but yet we got the job done. I was telling my wife one time, I said some of my most successful arrests of bad people were hiding out from the police were in these seedy hotels or these big hotels. And I always used to go hide by the ice machine and the vending machine, because I knew they would very rarely leave to go out and eat somewhere they could be seen, but they come out and eat from the vending machines. So imagine, just little tricks like that. And nowadays they don't have to do it because they've got so many detection tools and stuff to know where these people are otherwise.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Great time to be alive.
Yeah. Well, listen, Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
We would love to show you the photo that we're talking about at some point in the future.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, just reach out. I'm always available.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Thanks again. Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me. Good luck, Ken and Mike, with your investigation. Rob and Cindy, you're doing a great job shining a light on this. I'm thankful to be part of it.
Great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.